Welcome to Hediye's podcast, where we talk about anything and everything that helps you live your best life. I am Hediye Safiyari, your host, and my guest today is Najwa Zebian, speaker, podcaster, author of several books mentioned featured in New York Times, Glamour, Canada, and many more. I am thrilled to have you here with me today, Najwa. Thanks for being here.
I'm thrilled to be speaking to you as well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I've been inspired by your work. I am so excited that I get to speak with you. And today I want to talk to you about change. You had your recent book, The Only Constant, which is so amazing. I personally can relate to you so much about your journey as a woman who grew up in Iran and now here in Canada. I was listening to some of your stories, and that made me want to reach out and speak with you. So we'll get to that. But I believe you're from originally Lebanon and now living in Canada, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and some of the stories that you shared in some of the podcasts I listened to, I really related to, because as someone who goes through living a completely different life and culture and adapting to change and expectations of culture, or living in two different worlds, really, and having experienced that myself, it was very relatable. So we'll talk about that. So speaking of that, talking about change,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many things that we go through in life, from moving from a different country to a different country, from relationships, from expectations of families, and all of those things. And I wanted to get your take on that.
Mm-hmm. I feel like when you want to change and there's certain people that come to your mind, like your family, like the culture, like the religion, whatever the change is, sometimes that removes your focus away from what it is that you want to do. And it shifts the focus to, is this change okay by everybody else? Am I going to lose these connections as a result of moving forward with this change? And what happens, especially with people who are empathetic like us and who are people pleasers and who were raised in a way where shame is heavily embedded in the way that you navigate life. Like if you make a mistake, you're made to feel like it has an impact on who you are as a person and your reputation and all of that. So anything that you try to change in your life where you're trying to break a certain rule or live your life in a way that isn't socially based on the society that you're in or that you come from, or culturally or religiously acceptable, you confuse your choice to do something for yourself with being a choice to end those connections, or being a choice to displease someone, or to be a bad person, or to be a rebel. So I've experienced that myself, and I had to work through that shame and work through that guilt and understand that if I make a choice for myself that's in my best interest, or maybe I still don't know if it's in my best interest, but it's a choice I made because I wanted to try something new. Maybe I wanted my life to be different. That's the focus. The focus isn't which connections are going to have to break as a result of this. That's a byproduct. That's not my original intention. My original intention of making a change for myself is to either explore my life and explore my options. My original intention is to try something that I think will make my life a better one in the long run, or try something that brings me closer to who I authentically am. If the people in my life decide that I'm a bad person as a result of that, that's a choice they're making.
Mm-hmm.
So I always tell people, don't think that it is 100% your responsibility to keep any kind of relationship in your life intact.
Mm-hmm.
It's always a two-way street. So it's not about the necessarily, you know, physically you go and visit the person, you go and see them, they come and see you. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that emotional space that we hold for each other to actually be ourselves and to feel like the other person will support us through anything. When a relationship is conditional in one direction, where it's like, these are the rules you have to follow, and if you don't, then I'm going to shut you out, or I'm going to exclude you, or I'm going to make you feel like something's wrong with you and you don't deserve my love, you don't deserve my respect. That's the kind of relationship that's going to completely break you if you continue to try to maintain it, because the only way to maintain it is for you to go back on everything that you want for yourself. So I find many people reach out to me who have issues like this with their family or with their community or with a group of friends who is super religious or super embedded into the culture that they belong from. And they just end up feeling like if they were to embrace who they really are or change their life in a way that resembles their new set of values that they've developed because they're just so convinced, they've done the research, they've spoken to many people, they've experienced life, and they say, I don't have the same values I used to have before, and I don't have the same values as these people anymore. And so I find that when a person is in that position, they feel like they have to hide, they have to be secretive. And I
Mhm.
wrote about it in The Only Constant. I said, you can tell yourself all you want that you're being private, but maybe it's not privacy, maybe it's shame driven secrecy. If you're, the only reason you're hiding something is because it makes you feel ashamed, if you were to admit it, then the people who are making you feel that way are pushing you to that privacy, and they're pushing you to hide certain things about yourself, in a way telling you, if you were to expose that part of yourself, I will not accept you, and I will make you feel like you deserve abandonment, you deserve whatever it is that they want to make you feel. So when somebody's in that position, I always say you have to start by understanding why it is that you've developed this fear that these people in particular will walk away from you, or that they will in some way shut you out and exclude you and make you feel like you're not worthy of belonging with them. So once you're able to tap into why it is, like, what's the core story that you can go back to, or stories from your past where you developed that fear of abandonment and exclusion. Maybe it's a fear of not being good enough, maybe it's a fear of not getting to certain milestones in your life. Because I know, like, one example that comes to mind is for women in certain cultures, if they were to live their lives in a certain way, then their own culture, or their own community might say, well, you're not somebody who's marriage material. We're not going to look at you in that way. And so you end up also feeling like you are excluded from the general progression that someone's life who belongs to that culture or community would follow. And then you don't really belong to the outer world that you're trying to learn about either. So you end up feeling like an outcast in both ways. And that's really lonely and it's really isolating. So always begin by understanding where that fear stems from, and be gentle with yourself and compassionate and say, I'm human. One of my core needs is to want to belong to something. One of my core needs is to want to be loved and cared for. One of my core needs is to want to feel like who I am isn't faulty. There's nothing wrong with me. So once you start giving yourself that compassion, in a way, you start rejecting the world that's rejecting you. You start saying, I actually don't want to be part of that. And I understand that a big part of why I tried so hard to belong to that world in the first place is because that pain of rejection, I didn't want to feel it. So I wanted to change the outcome in some way, hoping that it will take the pain of rejection away. But then once you gain that awareness, you say, I actually don't want to be around people who make me feel like the core of who I am, or the things I'm trying to do with my life make me someone who deserves to be rejected. So I always say, start there. Start by understanding where that fear comes from.
It is so true. And the whole time you were speaking, I was thinking of so many examples. Fear of judgment,
Mm-hmm.
judgment, fear of abandonment. Those are all the things. And I believe as we get older and we get more mature, we start caring less and being more confident enough to actually accept what is and living a true, authentic life. Um, Growing up in Iran, again, going back to examples of different cultures and different expectations and society and parents, you're always trying to be that people pleaser, doing
Mm-hmm.
following what the norm does. And you go to college, university, do your education, you get married, you have kids, and every time you do something, it's like, okay, when is the next kid, when is this, when is that, like there are these steps that you're
Mm-hmm.
expected to follow, and maybe these steps are not steps for everybody,
Yeah.
and maybe like we always, it was expected to either become a doctor or a lawyer, and any other job was not a real job. And I still get asked, do you like, oh, you after like 2 masters, like you became a TikToker? And I'm like, well, if I didn't do that much education, I wouldn't be able to speak like this or try to make an impact and change lives and give back to the community and like all of the things that you're talking about and you're doing. So it's I feel like maybe when we get, like, I certainly see it in myself in my 40s, I finally have the courage to just do whatever that needs to be done without
Yeah.
hearing what other people think, whether it's speaking on social media or um, having a job or thing that's outside of the norm, knowing that ultimately it's something that you truly believe in and it's making a difference. And it goes back to relationships as well. A lot of people
Mm-hmm.
are stuck, and this is something that a lot of people will probably relate to, stuck in relationships that are not fulfilling or happy, but it was chosen for them by parents or society or themselves.
I think that would be one of my biggest nightmares, honestly.
Yeah,
I can't I can imagine the level of pain and suffocation that someone would go through as a result of feeling forced to be with someone that they don't want to be with. Um, it's dehumanizing, it's humiliating,
yeah.
and it completely erodes your power and your voice because your basic human rights are not being respected. Like you have a right to choose who you want to be with. You have a right to choose who you want to spend your life with. And also because of that kind of dynamic that exists in so many cultures in the world where there are maybe arranged marriages that, yeah, sometimes they work for people, but what one topic that I think we don't talk about enough is when abuse is involved in those dynamics and a woman feels like she can't say anything because even if she does, nobody's going to listen or nobody's going to do anything about it. Like that breaks my heart to think of that.
Mm,
So it's 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 very interesting to dive into the chains that sometimes culture and religion put on people. And I have a very different view of religion now that I've, grown and evolved and done my own research and my own work and my own inner contemplation. I don't think that religion should ever be used to control any other human. I think a person who believes in a certain religion should never say, well, this is God's message, therefore I'm going to force you to do what my interpretation of what God's message is. It's it's not a human's job or obligation to force another human to do something just because that's their interpretation of what religion is. It's so wrong because I used to get comments a lot. So a few years ago, I took my hijab off and I had worn it since I was 13 years old. And I remember the number of people who left comments saying, um, you're like just really awful things. I'm not going to repeat them. But I got to a point where I started responding and saying, like, why are you talking this way? Or like, how can you say that you're a good religious person and you're speaking this way to somebody else? And they would say, well, God tells us to tell people, it's our responsibility to tell people when they've been misguided or when they aren't taking uh, making the right decisions for themselves. And so one time I said, well, show me the DM that God sent you to tell
Mm.
you to come and tell me that,
Yeah.
like I just got to a point where I was just like, there is such a thing as free will.
Mm.
Like you have your right to your religious beliefs, but don't go and tell another person that unless they follow those things, they're an awful human being. That makes no sense. Like, what foundation are you coming from? Because if your foundation is a foundation of kindness and peace, then that's how you speak to everybody else. And I know many people who are super into religion and super faithful, and they are the nicest people you'll ever meet. And they will never look at another person who like takes their hijab off or lives their lifestyle in a way where it doesn't follow the rules. They will never look at them and say you're an awful person. They will just always be supportive and loving and open to welcoming you into their lives. And I think that's how it should be. It's not your job to go and try to control somebody else in the name of, well, I'm just doing my job as a person who belongs to this religion or to this faith. That's not, you're taking away someone's own freedom, right? So I think with a lot of the messages that we get um, from the cultures that we belong to, sometimes it is very black and white when it comes to women and men and what they're allowed to do and what's considered permissible for a man versus a woman, what's considered a good gender role for a man or a woman. When you look at all of that, then you understand that there's a whole other layer that plays into our lives when we try to make a certain change in our lives. And I actually wrote about that quite a bit in The Only Constant. I said, people who haven't been bound to cultural and religious um, bonds and restraints and rules, it's hard for them to understand the kind of difficulty that someone experiences
Mhm.
for a change that they would look at and be like, that's so easy. I can do that. And you're like, yeah, you can do that because you don't have all these other factors that are saying to you, you're an awful person. You're ostracized. Go. We don't want to see you. We don't want to be connected to you. There's a whole other like big, huge layer that people sometimes have to overcome. So when I talk about the example of taking my hijab off, let me give you another more simplified example that I think more people can relate to is just choosing what I like to wear. So like
Mm.
after I took my hijab off, there was a period of time where I continued to wear like long sleeves and, you know, pants and long dresses. And then bit by bit, I started to just change because I've always loved fashion even before I took my hijab off. So I started wearing shorter skirts and maybe not turtlenecks anymore. And I started showing my arms, and I got so many comments from people who originally tried to interfere in my life when I took the hijab off,
Mhm.
but then they kind of quieted and calmed down. And then they came back and said, well, if you're going to take it off, at least continue to dress modestly. And I'm just like, all I wore was a t-shirt, or I wore something that maybe showed my collarbone a little bit, or and so think of a person who maybe lives in Canada who's lived here their whole lives and they just belong to the mainstream culture. Do they even think for 2 seconds before they put a t-shirt on or before they put a tank top on or before they wear shorts? They don't. That they consider that something like, that's my right, I get to do that. Whereas for me, it was like this big, huge thing. And so I say to any person who reads the book, you have to understand that just because something is so easy for someone else, it doesn't mean that you sit there and you judge yourself for finding it to be so difficult. Because from your story and where you come from, it is difficult. Like,
Yeah,
there's no point in gaslighting yourself out of your own like fears and frustrations and saying, well, that person was able to do that so easily, they're able to wake up every morning and decide what they're going to wear. I shouldn't have that in the way. And it's like, yeah, you shouldn't, but you do, and you have to tend to it. There's no point in saying, just because it shouldn't be that way, then I'm going to behave as if it's not that way.
it
Yeah.
is. It is so true. It is so true, and something that's hard to understand unless you've gone through it. As we speak, I just posted a video that the slit of my skirt is, comes up higher. And the whole time, as I posted it, I was thinking it, oh God, my mother is watching this and she's going to comment. And I'm a
Yeah,
40-year-old woman. So it's the, it's the growing up and it's the expectation that it's always in the back of your mind. And no matter how you try to just be and live your life, there's always this thing that what are people going to say? Like, what is this person going to say? That person, is this okay? Is this not okay? It still happens every day. And yeah, it goes back to your core,
for
bring it back.
sure.
And
Yeah. You have to validate that for yourself. Like, you have to look at your own reality and say, this is why I struggle so much. Yes, I shouldn't be. That shouldn't be someone else's choice to make for me, but it is what it is, and I have to start there. One of the main questions I've been getting in the interviews I've been doing about The Only Constant is, where would you tell someone who is contemplating a certain change to start? Like, where do you start?
mm,
And I said, you start where you are. You start by understanding why it is that you are the way that you are. Where did you come from? What beliefs did you grow up with?
mhm,
What values did you grow up with? What's the story or the stories that are internalized within you about your limits of what you can achieve and what you can do in your life? What's your understanding of how much choice you have versus maybe you grew up in an environment where you had to prioritize the feelings of others over your own, or maybe you had to respect authority too much. So you have to understand where it is that you come from and where it is that you stand. And then when you ask yourself, where do I want to be? What's this change that I want to make? Now you're starting with where you actually are, not with where you think you should be or with where logic thinks you should be. That's why I don't agree with a lot of the advice that I see online from people who are coaches or who are motivational speakers. eh, the way they speak sometimes makes a person feels like if they're not able to change something in their lives, it's because they don't want it badly enough, or it's because they don't have enough courage, or it's because they're not strong enough, or they haven't, grown up or matured enough. And it's like, no, that's not it. That could be it in some cases, but a person who really wants to change something in their lives, they're bound by their survival mode. They're bound by where they come from, the beliefs they grew up with. Sometimes they have their own internal battles with the voices that they've internalized over the years that tell them that they're a bad person. Just like you said right now with your skirt, like you're thinking of what your mom might think, or with what people who care about things like that might think, or what they might say, or how they might judge you. And so you have to start with where you are. You have to start with your own story, your own experience, and imagine that you are coaching yourself through the change as if you are coaching a friend or someone that you care about through the change. And that's the only way that you're going to be able to actually give yourself that empathy and compassion that you would so easily give to somebody else. Like if I had a friend come to me and she said, I'm thinking of doing this one thing. I remember a few years ago, actually, I won't even imagine something. I'll give you a true story. Um, a friend of mine, and we're still friends. She was married at the time. She had been married for about 20 years. And we were having coffee, and she finally opened up to me about the fact that this wasn't working out anymore. She wanted to leave. It wasn't good for her. It wasn't healthy. It's been really bad for a really long time. And I just sat with her in that story and I said, okay, what do we need to do? I didn't sit there and say, get up and pack your stuff right now and leave, and like you don't deserve this. That's not what she needed. She obviously knows that stuff, but what do we need to do right now so that you could feel safe? Because that's when a person feels safe and protected, when they're not being made to feel like they are being judged for the fact that they're staying, or that they are being judged for the fact that they haven't done the right thing for themselves. Nobody wants that, and nobody needs that. It's life, nobody, we're not machines and robots where the moment we know the right decision to make, that's it, we make it. We're humans, we struggle, we have difficult times doing things. I had another friend who was struggling with her family and with having her family control absolutely everything that she did. And to her, that was like, it would have been the end of the world for her to try to just break away and say, I don't want a relationship with you guys anymore. And that's valid. I think I hear so many stories on social media where people are like, yeah, I haven't spoken to my family in 20 years. And they talk about it as if it was the easiest thing to do. And it's not so simple for people who grew up thinking family is absolutely everything. You need to please them. And if you don't, then something must be wrong with you, or you're not a good person. You're not a good son. You're not a good daughter. So you have to start with where you are, and you have to guide yourself through the change, whether it's one that you chose for yourself, whether it's one that happened and you're trying to deal with it, or if it's one that you absolutely must make in order for you to live your life authentically.
I see a lot of people around me going through breakups, and the number one comment you hear is like, oh, it must be midlife crisis, because people in their 40s, they think the grass is greener the other side, or they've missed out, or because they got married too early. Any comment on that?
I mean, I've had friends who've gone through that and they've been accused of things like that. And I think many times, especially for people who get married super young, they don't know why they got married. They just did it because they thought, especially in our cultures where to date someone, you basically have to marry them, as in to pursue the relationship that deeply, you have to be married. And so many younger people will use that as an excuse to run away from home. If they're not allowed to move out from the house before they're married, which is the case for so many. Like it's a lot more common than people would like to admit.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might get to a point where you've experienced that much pain and that much, I have no idea who the hell I am anymore. I've just been put in a position where I am there to serve my partner, my kids, whatever. And I'm at a point where I know who I am, or I want to discover who I am and what I want, and I want to walk away. And that's I think that's more than valid and that's okay. Maybe you are having a midlife crisis. That's fine. You're not gonna walk away from something in your life that's good for you. And let's say it is, but you want to figure out if you would choose this person again, then you would choose them again.
Mhm.
But I think that whole judgment where people get that messaging like, oh, nobody honors marriage anymore, and nobody's like the way that we used to be in the olden days. And it's like, yeah, because you were taught before unconditional loyalty and unconditional, I stay no matter what. But now people understand that relationships are about mutual growth and respect and evolution. And maybe you want a different dynamic for yourself, and that's okay. I talk about one story in The Only Constant where a woman reached out to me and said that after being with her husband for like 20 years or more, I can't remember the number, she said, I had no idea who I was anymore. I didn't even know what kind of music I liked, what food I liked. And she said, when I finally said to him that that's it, it's over, he said, you're having a breakdown. And then to me, she said, I was having a breakthrough because my whole life I was waiting for his validation. My whole life I was waiting for him to see me as enough. And I would do all these things just to get that validation. And I don't want to do that anymore. I think that's what a lot of people go through. And that's very valid. That's an ending, but it's also a new beginning. And for anybody who's going through that or going through something else in their lives where it's a big change and it's a big transition, I would say remember that every ending that you go through is going to have a certain kind of pain because it's a stepping stone between where you are and what's familiar to you and what feels safe and comfortable and what you know how to navigate, and between a new way of being. It's a new reality. It's an unfamiliar. You're going to feel that discomfort where now you're deciding certain things. Nobody's telling you how to do certain things. You're paving your own path. So don't take that resistance or that difficulty that you have as an indication to go back on your decision to have that ending in your life. That's very natural. So if you experience that, it's just something huge is changing in your life. Things are going to change. So don't think that these changes that we absolutely have to make for ourselves are like as exciting as they are in movies, because a movie will never show you the long, difficult time that it takes to actually make that transition between being in a certain state and being in another one. They'll just show you the moment where the main character has that epiphany where it's like, I want to change my life around. And then they'll have the motivational music in the background and the happy stuff. And they show you the main character sitting with a pen and paper and making plans and doing this and doing that. And all of it all together is like 3-4 minutes. And then it's months later or years later, and the change is now there. So you are living real life. You are going to go through this struggle. It's going to stretch out. It's going to feel like it's the end of the world, but it's possible and you can do it.
Yes. And we are different people in our 30s, 40s, 50s than we were when we were 20. So, of course, everything is, I mean, look at how much has changed in the past 20 years. So, and
Yes,
the trick is to grow, to be able to accept the growth and grow with each other as opposed to in different directions. And that's what happens with a lot of people, unfortunately.
absolutely. Yeah. So that's why start where you are is very important. Stop comparing your life to that of others. Stop comparing the difficulty of a change that somebody else experienced to your own. Stop comparing your journey to other people's journeys because you're not the same person. Stop comparing your life to what your mom's life used to be like or what your aunt's life used to be like, because we're living in different generations and different times. And you have the right to make your own decisions. You have the right to think in your own way, and you have the right to change your values and your beliefs. You have the right to those things. So Yeah, sometimes we get stuck in certain trauma bonds and in certain bonds that hold us to inauthentic versions of ourselves or versions of ourselves where we didn't know who we were. And so we were very much looking to the world around us to tell us who we can be and what's possible for us and what's not possible for us. But now we're changing that. Now we're becoming people of choice and we want to pave the path for ourselves. We want to lead our lives. And that just means that we are absolutely going to have to end certain connections in our lives. We're absolutely going to have to disappoint certain people and live with that disappointment and say, that's okay. I'll disappoint as many people as I need as long as I don't disappoint
Yeah.
myself.
And the way I look at it, pave the way for ourselves and also whoever is watching us. I have a teenage daughter, and they're watching, and they, whatever you do, you're also showing them how to make
Absolutely.
decisions for yourself and moving forward. We're coming to the last 2 minutes, and
Okay.
I always ask for like a takeaway or a message,
Mm-hmm.
something simple to leave everyone with, to embrace change or
Mm-hmm.
to live authentically. What would that be?
So I called the only constant because the only constant in life is change. But I want people to remember that the only constant in your life is you.
Mhm.
So if there is a person you need to trust with the path ahead, it's you. And if there's a person you need to give all the love that you can and all the compassion to, it's you. And if there's a person that you need to say, I understand everything you've been through. I understand your struggle and I know how hard this is. And you deserve to live the life that you want. It's you. So that's my message.
I love it. Najwa, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much
Same.
for this conversation. I definitely learned a lot and enjoyed this conversation and hope that I get to talk to you again. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a lovely day.